Roughly 106 million people sat down to watch a single half hour of television in 1983, and almost none of them noticed the small details hiding in plain sight for 11 years. When MASH premiered on CBS in 1972, Alan Alda, Wayne Rogers, McLean Stevenson, and Loretta Swit turned a Korean War surgical tent into the most watched comedy in America. But the set was stuffed with secrets, in-jokes, and quiet tricks most fans walked right past. Here are 21 of them, counting down to the one nobody catches the first time. Hit subscribe and let's start the search. Number 21. Look closely at the very first episode, and the chaplain isn't quite the man you remember. In the 1972 pilot, Father Mulcahy is played by an actor named George Morgan, who appears once and then vanishes. From the second episode on, the role belongs to William Christopher, who makes the gentle priest his own for 11 years. Most viewers never registered the swap. Christopher so completely owns Mulcahy that the pilot's version feels like a stranger in his collar. But that wasn't the only quiet recast hiding in the cast list. Number 20. Before Harry Morgan was the warm, horse-loving Colonel Potter, he'd already turned up in the 4077th as someone far stranger. In a third-season episode, Morgan guest stars as Major General Bartford Hamilton Steele, a visiting officer who's completely unhinged, saluting invisible men and putting people on trial. A season later, he returns, same actor, brand new character, and becomes the show's steady moral center. Producers liked him so much as a lunatic that they brought him back as the exact opposite. They clearly trusted a face you'd already seen. Number 19. Plant your eyes on the wooden signpost in the middle of camp, and you're looking at an inside joke that ran for years. The arrows point toward real cities, Toledo, San Francisco, Seoul, with the mileage to each painted carefully on. Several of those distances point to the real hometowns of cast and crew members, a private wink built into the scenery. The prop became so iconic, it's now treated as a genuine artifact of the war it only pretended to depict. The care didn't stop at the props department either. Number 18. Watch Radar carry his clipboard everywhere, and you'll notice he almost never shows his left hand. Gary Berghoff was born with brachydactyly, which left 3 fingers on that hand smaller than the others. Rather than hide it with effects, the show let Radar simply hold things: a clipboard, a teddy bear, a stack of files, to keep the hand naturally out of frame. Berghoff turned a personal insecurity into part of the character's fidgety, always busy energy. It's misdirection that's almost impossible to unsee once you know. Number 17. Hawkeye is such a perfect nickname that few people ask where it came from. In the show's own story, Benjamin Franklin Pierce earns it from his father, who loved exactly one book, James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans, and borrowed its frontier hero. It's the only nickname dear old dad ever handed out. That literary thread gives a goofy army surgeon a surprisingly bookish backbone. Writers tucked that kind of care into the smallest props, too. Number 16. The homemade gin still bubbling in the swamp isn't just background dressing. It's one of the most consistent props in the series. Hawkeye and his tent mates build and tend the contraption across seasons, a tangle of tubes and beakers that turns misery into martinis. The crew kept its look continuous for years, so devoted viewers could track it tent to tent. It's sly visual shorthand. In a place built on death, these surgeons literally manufacture relief. But not every long-running fixture was so cheerful behind the scenes. Number 15. Here's a detail buried in paperwork rather than the picture. Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John, never actually signed his MASH contract. He'd objected to a clause and left it unsigned, assuming it would get sorted out, and it never did. When a dispute over his role's size and billing boiled over after the 3rd season, that missing signature meant the studio couldn't legally hold him. Rogers simply walked. A single unsigned page reshaped the cast and sent Trapper home for good. That kind of friction shaped what made it to air, too. Number 14. Few things divide MASH fans like the laugh track, and the story behind it is a quiet 11-year war of its own. The producers, led by Larry Gelbart, hated the idea of canned laughter over a combat hospital. CBS insisted anyway, convinced audiences needed the cue to know they were watching a comedy. The compromise. There are no laughs during operating room scenes, where surgeons work over wounded soldiers, because even the network agreed laughing there was grotesque. When the series hit DVD, producers finally got their wish. You can switch the laugh track off entirely. Watch it silent, and the show feels startlingly modern. 13 more details to go. Drop your favorite catch so far in the comments, and let's keep digging. Number 13. Near the end of the fourth season, MASH does something almost no sitcom dares. The episode called The Interview is shot entirely in black and white, framed as a news reporter visiting the 4077th and asking the doctors plain questions about the war. Larry Gelbart modeled it on real Korean War correspondent footage, and much of the cast improvised their answers in character. The result looks less like a comedy and more like a documentary that wandered onto the wrong lot. It won an Emmy, and it's the moment the show quietly announced it was something bigger than jokes. Number 12. When BJ Hunnicutt replaces Trapper in Season 4, the writers hand the audience a puzzle they never solve. Ask what the BJ stands for, and the show refuses to tell you. It's a running gag that BJ himself shrugs off, eventually joking the initials come from his parents, BA and J. No first name is ever confirmed across his many seasons in camp. It's a tiny act of writerly mischief, a blank the show dares you to fill. Mike Farrell played it so straight, most viewers never realized they'd been denied an answer on purpose. Number 11. One of the show's most beloved recurring figures barely qualifies as a regular. Dr. Sidney Friedman, the wry Army psychiatrist who turns up whenever the camp's sanity phrase, is played by Alan Arbus across roughly a dozen episodes. Arbus brought such calm authority that fans assumed he was permanent, when really, he floats in and out for years. He's the rare character allowed to simply tell the truth about what war does to people, and the show leans on him in its darkest hours. Some absences from the cast, though, were deliberate corrections. Number 10. The first season includes a surgeon named Spearchucker Jones, plus a couple of other faces, who all quietly disappear by Season 2. The reason is a small piece of historical homework. As the story goes, the producers came across research suggesting there were no black surgeons stationed in MASH units during the Korean War, and decided the character couldn't honestly remain. Rather than invent around it, they wrote him out. It's a sober example of a comedy policing its own accuracy in an era that rarely bothered. That instinct reached all the way to the voices you barely heard. Number 9. Listen to the camp loudspeaker crackling between scenes, and you're hearing one of the show's unsung performers. Those absurd announcements about movies, food, lost laundry, incoming wounded were delivered by uncredited actors, chiefly Sal Viscuso and Todd Sussman, for much of the run. The lines were often written as throwaway comedy, dropped in to fill the air the way a real Army camp's PA would. Many fans spent years not realizing a specific person stood behind that disembodied voice. It's the texture that made the 4077th feel like a place rather than a set. Number 8. Alan Alda appears in every single one of the show's 251 episodes, the only cast member to go the entire distance on screen. He and Loretta Swit are also the only two actors present in both the 1972 pilot and the 1983 finale, bookending 11 years of war and wariness. That continuity is part of why Hawkeye feels like the soul of the series. He's quite literally always there. Alda's reach, though, went far past acting. Number 7. In the fall of 1982, a real brush fire tore through Malibu Creek State Park, where MASH filmed its outdoor scenes, and burned much of the 4077th to the ground. The production faced a choice: rebuild quietly and pretend nothing happened, or use it. They used it. In the series finale, a fire sweeps through the camp and forces the unit to evacuate, and the charred, blackened landscape on screen is the genuine aftermath of the actual blaze. The writers folded a logistical disaster straight into the story, turning lost scenery into one of the finale's most haunting images. That willingness to blur reality and fiction defined the whole production. We're nearly at the top, and the last few details are the ones even longtime fans swear they never noticed. Number 6. Alan Alda didn't just star in MASH. He slowly took the whole thing over, and the awards shelf proves it. Over the run, he won Emmys not only for playing Hawkeye, but also for writing and for directing episodes of the series, making him the first person in television history to win in all 3 categories for the same show. He wrote some of its most ambitious installments and directed dozens, steering the tone from broad comedy towards something closer to drama. That creative control is why later seasons feel so personal, so willing to sit in discomfort. And Alda wasn't the only one carrying real history into the role. Number 5. Here's a detail that quietly bends time. The Korean War lasted about 3 years, from 1950 to 1953, and MASH ran for 11. The series dramatized a conflict more than 3 times longer than the war itself, which means the doctors aged through nearly a decade of seasons while the calendar around them barely moved. Holidays repeat, characters reference the same stretch of fighting, and the timeline stretches like taffy to fit the show's lifespan. Most viewers never did the math, swept along by the characters instead. It's a strange magic trick that let the show outlive its own subject by years. Number 4. Corporal Klinger spends the series scheming to get tossed out of the army in dresses, which makes the truth about the man playing him quietly remarkable. Jamie Farr was the only member of the main cast to actually serve in Korea, drafted into the U.S. Army in the 1950s after the fighting. When Klinger flashes his dog tags on screen, those are Farr's real tags from his own service, kept and worn into the role. Farr was also genuinely from Toledo, which is why Klinger never stops pining for it. So the show's most ridiculous character, the one desperate to escape the military, was played by the one actor who'd truly worn the uniform there. Number 3. That mournful instrumental over the opening helicopters has a secret tucked in its history. The melody, "Suicide is Painless," comes from Robert Altman's 1970 film, and the lyrics, which the TV show drops, keeping only the tune, were written by Altman's son Mike, who was just 14 at the time. The director had tried to write something deliberately stupid and couldn't, so he handed the job to his teenage son, who finished it in minutes. The strange payoff. Because the song kept earning royalties for decades, Mike Altman reportedly made far more money from those few verses than his famous father made directing the entire movie. But the detail that lands hardest is one the cast lived through for real. Number 2. When McLean Stevenson left the show, the writers made a decision almost unheard of for a 1970s comedy. They killed his character. At the end of the 3rd season, Colonel Henry Blake is discharged and heading home. And in the final scene, Radar walks into the operating room to announce that Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan with no survivors. What makes it land so hard is what happened on set. As the story goes, the cast wasn't given that last page of script until the cameras were nearly rolling, so the stunned, grieving faces are partly real. It was the moment MASH told viewers, plainly, that this was a show where the war could take anyone. Number 1. On February 28, 1983, MASH aired its 2.5-hour finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, and roughly 106 million Americans tuned in. A number so enormous it stood as the most watched single television episode in U.S. history for the next 27 years, until a Super Bowl finally edged past it. To put it in scale, more than half the country's TV sets were on the same program at once. And reports at the time described water systems spiking during the commercial breaks as the nation moved as one. The episode ran far longer than a normal installment because the network knew the country wanted a real goodbye. A modest war comedy ended as a genuine national event, and nothing on television has quite matched that shared farewell since. MASH turned a war nobody wanted to remember into a place people genuinely missed when it was gone. Funny, furious, and unafraid to grieve. That's why the empty swamp still aches a little. Subscribe to Mystery Crunch. We've got plenty more stories like this one. And if you enjoyed this, check out our deep dive on Cheers. That one's just as wild.